to address. And he hinted at it a couple of weeks ago, but now it's really no holds barred. And that's Garrett Wilson is becoming sick of this franchise. And as pro tank as I want to be, like, I will expect, like, especially in a draft class where it's like there's not like a clear cut number one guy or clear cut players at the top that we think will certainly help the Jets. Like, I would expense at the expense of the tank, make this guy happy, because the quotes he was giving after the game were very clear that he's sick of this franchise and he needs to be a franchise cornerstone. So, Paul, why don't you share some of what he said after the game and we can go through it.
Yeah, I'll start with the funny one. They asked him about Rodgers having his first 300-yard game as a Jet, and he said, "It was cool. I'm glad he got over that hurdle, I guess." And then there was like a silence, and he goes, "Cool." Right? And that came on the heels of an article that came out, I can't remember if it was Sunday morning or Saturday morning, where they asked him if Rodgers coming back to the team has any bearing on whether or not he wants to continue to play for the Jets or not. And he basically said, no, it had absolutely no bearing at all. Right. Which is like, it's so funny to see what started out as such a promising relationship where we were like, he's going to help Garrett Wilson so much. And then he gets hurt and he says, "I'm sorry, kid," when he's on the table after he tears his Achilles, to now we're at the point where Garrett clearly doesn't give a shit about anything he's accomplishing here because they're not winning. And he could care less if he's coming back next year. And I think in some ways that makes me like Garrett even more, that he's like, yeah, no, I don't give a rat's ass about him passing for 300 yards. Like, we lost the game. Like, he couldn't even fathom the question that he was being asked. And that makes me like Garrett Wilson even more.
Can I interrupt you just to give you some really good news so that we can get, or
I know,
good news for
I know
you,
about it already.
Yeah.
I was going to let you exist for like a half hour more in peace before I told you.
Yeah, no. I mean, this sucks for me, but congrats on Juan Soto. That's big for, I'm sure, a majority of this podcast fandom. So that, just another fucking dagger for me tonight. But you enjoy that win and that $765 million contract.
I was gonna let us go to the end of the pod before I broke that, and then but hey, I'll take it. Yeah. So
Sorry, get back to Garrett.
No, a couple of the other things he said. Losing period sucks. He said when you're up in the fourth quarter, all of a sudden it starts to feel like we have a losing problem, like a gene or some shit. It's not like we're going out there and getting our butt beat from start to finish. We have a chance to win the game. We're supposed to win the game. Odds are in our favor, and we find a way to lose, which again is just something that he's echoing, that the fans are saying. Like, we've been saying that for weeks, and it's refreshing to hear a player talk like that. It's scary because he's our guy and we like him and we want him to stay, but it's refreshing also. He also says that if you told me in training camp, I would have been shocked as far as how the seasons went and stuff. He said, after the way we prepped, after the way we practiced, handled business, and we had the other teams come in, I would have been like, yeah, you're lying. Hell no. We put it together. But one of my takeaways from this is we got to win when the season comes. Winning in the offseason is winning in the offseason. Winning in training camp is winning in training camp. Let's win when it matters. Again, I think going to what I said in the opening about the process answers all the time, this is the first answer to a question I've seen that kind of punches through that a little bit and says, yeah, no, our process is good, but we're not winning, so it's obviously not, right? It's like he's starting to walk that ground of admitting that there's something deeper wrong because they're not able to win when it matters. And again, I appreciate that about him. And then the last one he said is, I don't think it's the mindset. The mindset is the opposite. Whether or not you can make right on your mindset is different. Our mindset is right. Our process is right. But at the end of the day, we got to stop being losers. Right. And so, I don't know, again, still kind of with the process stuff, but at least there's a recognition there and a frustration, like a real deal level of frustration. And I think you're starting to hear it in some other players too. Sherwood made a comment after the game, basically admitting that he knows that like 40% of the team is going to be gone next year and how that's like a little bit of a sobering thought to come to, and like the season's effectively over. And so, yeah, man, I mean, you got to find a way to make this guy happy. Like we've talked about Jets tax in terms of free agents in the past. Like we have pretty much worked our way into a situation where you might have to pay a Jets tax on your own player now because he's seen it from the inside. He knows what's happening here. And I think you try to extend Garrett Wilson as soon as you possibly can. The guy has not had a significant injury in his 3 years as a Jet. He'll be over 1,000 yards in each of his first 3 seasons. If he goes over 1,000 for a fourth, I think that'll be a Jets record. I think the last Jets receiver to do it 3 consecutive was George Sauer, who was on the Super Bowl team, which is like, that might be a name you don't even know. So like, yeah, man, I mean, they got to find a way to make this guy happy. And I'll stop short of saying that you involve him in some of the decisions in the offseason because I think that that's a dangerous road to go down. I don't think it would be dangerous with Garrett Wilson specifically because we've had a lot of exposure to him as a person and his family and his father and his mother and the way that he was raised and his brothers. And like, I think because of that exposure, I wouldn't feel as worried about involving a player in personnel decisions as I might with other players, as I do with Garrett Wilson, because you feel so good about the guy that he is. But I do still think that that's a dangerous road to go down. But I think, like, again, you involve him to whatever extent you're comfortable, where he is a part of what's happening this year and what's going to be happening next year going forward.
Yeah, and I think we're like, Garrett's sick of it. We're all sick of winning the offseason. The Jets have won the offseason for the last like 5 years in a row. It's time to do shit. Yeah. It's time to do shit when it actually matters. And you know, when you're going through those quotes about he doesn't care whether Rodgers is back, and you know, we've said a lot on Badlands that like the Jets are going to have a new GM next year. The first thing on their priority list should be extending Garrett Wilson, which I 100% agree with. Do you think there's a world where they put an extension in front of Garrett and he's like, nah, I'm not signing that. I'm not committing to another. Or is it just, I'll take the money and I'll force my way out if, you know, it doesn't work out in another year? But do you think there's a legit scenario where Garrett doesn't take an extension?
It's a good question.
I hope it doesn't get to that point is basically where I'm saying. Like, I hope it's not already at that point, but I think we might be at a real crossroads where Garrett might say, I'm not going to sign an extension until I see how some of the moves in the offseason work out. And that, like, it might get to a point where if he won't sign shit with us, then we have to flip him. And that would be a disaster, in my opinion.
I don't want to be a complete sap about how good of a dude Garrett Wilson is. But I know that I'm kind of edging into that territory now at this point, but I almost think that there is a world where he says no to an extension based upon him wanting to do the right thing, which is, I don't want to take the money and then force my way out if this continues to get bad. So why don't I play on the 4th year? We'll maybe think about the 5th year option when we get there. Maybe we'll do an extension at the end of next year, but I need to see in the short term that things are changing. Now, that is like, I'm going through this thought as I say it out loud, so allow me to immediately contradict myself now. As a professional athlete, especially at that position where you're taking hits and you're coming over the middle and you have a high potential for non-contact injuries in the lower half of your body, that's probably a crazy thing to do, right? To leave money on the table for the sake of, I want to do things the right way, and I want to make sure that if I do go somewhere else, it happens in the right order and I don't create a difficult situation. Like, that's probably too good for anybody in that position, because there's the other half of it, which is you have to take care of yourself, you have to take care of your family, and you have to maximize your earning potential in the NFL in what is basically an average career span of like 3 to 4 years, right? So do I think it's realistic? Like, yeah, I do. I think it's probably like a 25% chance that he says, no, I'm going to wait on it, right? And, you know, unless you give me top of the market money, like more than Justin Jefferson, which is not happening. yeah, I'm going to wait and I'm going to see if I can put up another good year. I'm going to see what you do as an organization. And then maybe I test out what happens outside of here, or I get into a franchise tag situation. Yeah, I think that's a possibility.
The Jets do have a lot of leverage given that he's under contract. They'll have the 5th year option. They could tag him if they want. So like they can kind of essentially bully him with the new GM, but like players do have power of they can just say like I'm not playing here and figure it out. And he obviously you would get a haul back for him, but he's one like when you get a haul back, you're hoping that you get a player like Garrett Wilson. I've said this all the time.
Yep.
So like do whatever
Bird in
you
the
have
hand.
to do. Do whatever you have to do to get him to sign that extension. If it means getting his input on like who the next guy is, I like, again, not taking it necessarily that far, but like do what you need to do to make this guy happy. He's one of the most important players on the team. So I want to turn really quickly and just talk about the offseason a little bit, since that's what matters now with team in elimination. What do you think of these 3 major categories, the coach, the GM, and the quarterback? Which do you think is the most important part of the Jets offseason?
So I kind of said something, and I'm going to give you a bad non-answer. So I'm going to be a bad partner here. And I'm sorry for that.
It's okay. I have a clear answer, so I'll tee it up to you.
So it is what it is, right? I talked about this with Connor last week on the main pod, where I basically said I'm concerned about how hot the talk is getting around Vrabel, because it's almost as if Jets fans are making him out to be a savior, when I don't think there is any one person or thing or position or hire or office that saves the Jets. Like, this is such a deep-rooted problem that has tentacles in so many areas of this organization that I think there is, you can make a case that there is a person who could come in and be a catalyst for change, but then it will depend on that person being able to diplomatically work with ownership over a long period of time to get the things that they're asking for, to create the change that they need within the organization, whether that be additional staff, headcount, money, areas of research in analytics, improvement in the medical. Like, I think it's so far reaching that we can't say that it's a quarterback. Like, we thought they were a quarterback away, dude. They weren't. So I don't think it's as simple as, are they a quarterback away? Are they a coach away? Are they a GM away? I think it's, can any one of those 3 guys come in and be skilled enough at working with the Johnsons to create the long-term change that is necessary for things to start moving in the right direction? And in the process of things starting to turn around and move in the right direction, can we catch lightning in a bottle while we have a bunch of good players on the team and make a good run into the postseason? So, like, it's a bad non-answer to your question, but I think that's like the unfortunate real answer, is that there is nobody who's coming here to save us. It's going to be a long, hard effort. I think one thing we can say is that it's not the quarterback. It's not going to be the most important piece, right? Because who had more cachet and power than Aaron Rodgers coming to this team? And he wasn't able to do it. And there's rumors that the owner tried to bench him in week 4. So it's not that guy, right? So it's got to be at least the coach or the GM who can be the catalyst for that change.
I think it's pretty clearly the coach. I think, Joe Douglas, for all of his faults and not being able to build depth, like he didn't leave the Jets in the worst possible spot. Like, we have pieces. We have Olu looks like a franchise left tackle in his limited starts. The interior of the offensive line is pretty good. We've got Garrett at wide receiver. Who knows about Adams sticking around, but he, at any case, he could return some value. The running back room looks great. Even if Brees is potentially a guy that gets floated in some trade talks, like the 2 guys behind him, especially today with Isaiah Davis, have like shown that they're NFL caliber players. Obviously, the defensive line was decimated by Joe Douglas this offseason. Tight end room needs to be rebuilt. Safety is an area of concern. Like, I'm not saying that the new GM isn't going to have his work cut out for him, but there are pieces there where we talked about how this team cannot win close games. Like, that is a coaching, in my opinion, that is a coaching flaw, and a coaching philosophy needs to change. And if there's going to be anything that shakes the Jets out of this cursed mentality where even the players are feeling it, it's a new guy being the leader of men in that building. And I know Vrabel isn't necessarily a savior. I hear you on that. But I do think having the right man for the job in the coaching realm is the most important factor going forward. So if that's one thing the team can get right this offseason, that's the thing I want it to be. You brought up quarterback. I want to end on like a fun note. There's a guy out there who's going to be a free agent at the end of the season who threw for 5 touchdowns today. Do you think, we've talked about it in the past, that a return could be coming with Sam Darnold? I think personally, like, why would he want to come here? Granted, we have a lot better receivers, a lot better O-line than the last time he was here, but I don't necessarily see a world where he would come back to the Jets after how everything went down. But like, where does he rank for you in terms of ideal targets? I know he's high up on your list, but is your dream offseason to go get Sam Darnold?
Yeah. I'm okay saying that out loud. I've been edging around it for a couple weeks now. I've also been very clear that while I did not have a microphone to talk into in 2021, I was in my personal life very vocal about this is the wrong decision. We should not be letting this dude walk. And if I'm being honest with you, it was 50% about, no, it was less than that. It was 25% about Sam Darnold and what I thought that he was or could be. It was 75% about team building. And why would you cast this guy off when he has 2 more years of control at a relatively affordable price as far as quarterbacks are concerned, and you have massive holes at receiver? You never gave him anyone to throw to. You never gave him anyone to protect him. And it was just an unbelievably bad situation as far as coaching is concerned. Free agent money was spent poorly. Le'Veon Bell, CJ Mosley, who sat out for a year and a half, basically, with an injury and COVID. So it was, at the time, it was much more about team building than it was about Sam. But it would be disingenuous for me to sit here and say that I don't genuinely think the guy is a good player and that we wronged him and that he has taken longer than I thought it would. But when he left here, he went to arguably the only worse situation in the NFL than the Jets in the Panthers, which probably put him in an even deeper hole. And he goes to San Francisco and sits behind Purdy for a year and works with Shanahan, and now he's with Kevin O'Connell. And I mean, the dude looks pretty good, right? And so I think the one thing, the popular thing to say right now among Jets fans when you suggest the possibility of bringing Sam Darnold back here next year is, well, is Kevin O'Connell coming with him? And I get that. It's a fair point.
I texted you this when you brought this up last week.